The silence of the early morning was shattered by the sound of knees hitting the wet asphalt. Michael Harrison, the man who, for 15 years, had faced the fiercest fires in Chicago without ever flinching, was now trembling like a leaf in the wind. In his arms, a 6-month-old baby cried out in sheer desperation, wrapped only in a damp blanket that reeked of smoke and despair. Behind him, his house, the same house where he had built all his dreams, was collapsing in a symphony of burning wood and shattering glass. The flames licked the night sky like red tongues hungry for destruction, and every crash that echoed felt like a dagger driven straight through his chest. Michael, get away from there. His fellow firefighters were shouting, but their voices seemed to come from another world. He'd known them for years, trusted them with his life. But right then, their words were just noise, because inside that blazing furnace, he had left behind everything that truly mattered. But this isn't where our story truly begins. To understand the pain of the man kneeling on the sidewalk, we need to go back in time, back when life was still simple, when waking up every morning felt like a blessing, not a curse. 3 weeks earlier, the Lincoln Park neighborhood woke up just like it had for the last 20 years, to the sound of Michael Harrison's siren rolling down Oak Street at exactly 6 a.m. It wasn't an emergency siren, just his old blue Ford pickup that had needed a new muffler for 2 years, something he never seemed to have time to fix. "There goes the town's hero," muttered Dolores Henley from her kitchen window as she brewed coffee for her husband. She said it every morning, not with sarcasm, but with the kind of genuine admiration only everyday heroes can inspire. Michael Harrison didn't look like the heroes you see in the movies, but his body told a different story. At 42, he kept himself in the kind of shape you only get from a lifetime of discipline. Broad shoulders, arms built from hard labor, posture straight from his years in the military before joining the Chicago Fire Department. Brown hair already streaked with gray at the temples, and a small scar on his chin, a reminder of a rescue gone wrong 5 years ago. But there was something about his eyes, a calmness that could steady anyone in a panic, a quiet confidence that made people believe everything would be all right. The Harrison home sat at the end of Oak Street, a modest 2-story red brick house with white shutters. Jake Harrison woke up every morning 5 minutes after his dad's truck roared to life. 16 years old, tall like his father, but still carrying the lanky awkwardness of adolescence, his dark hair always messy despite his mom's constant protests. He never admitted it to anyone, but he loved waking up to that old, beat-up engine. It was a daily reminder that his dad was out saving lives, and it filled him with pride. Sarah Harrison, 39, a local elementary school teacher, had the kind of presence that could make any child behave with just one look. Her blonde hair was always tied in a practical ponytail, and her green eyes sparkled when she laughed. And she laughed a lot. She was the kind of woman who could light up a room just by walking into it. "Jake, come down and eat." Sarah's voice carried up the stairs with that motherly tone that didn't leave room for negotiation. The Harrison kitchen was the heart of their home. A wooden table with 6 chairs, always holding on to the hope of more kids someday. A fridge covered in drawings from Sarah's students, family photos, and appointment reminders. The smell of fresh coffee always in the air, something baking in the oven almost every morning. "Sleep well, champ?" Michael asked every morning as Jake came down, still rubbing his eyes. It was their little ritual, a quiet tradition that kept them connected before they each went their separate ways for the day. "Like a rock," Jake would reply, also part of the ritual. But on that specific morning, 3 weeks before the tragedy, he stopped halfway down the stairs and looked at his father with a strange seriousness. "Dad, have you ever been scared?" Michael paused, coffee cup halfway to his lips. Sarah glanced over from the stove, sensing the unusual tone in her son's voice. "Scared of what, Jake?" "Of not being able to save someone. Of getting there too late." The silence that settled in the kitchen was heavy. Michael set his cup down and looked at his son. Really looked, as if seeing him for the first time that day. "Every firefighter feels fear, son. Fear is what keeps us alive. It's what helps us make the right calls. But there's a difference between being afraid and letting fear control you. And what if it's someone you love? What if it's—" Jake glanced around the kitchen, at his mom, his dad, the high chair where baby Emma was still sleeping peacefully. "What if it's your family?" Sarah stepped closer, drying her hands on her apron. "Jake, what's going on? Did you have a nightmare?" "No, Mom. I don't know. I just think about these things sometimes." Michael stood up and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Jake, look at me. Nothing is going to happen to our family. And you know why? Because we're a team. All of us. We look out for each other." Jake nodded, but something in his eyes didn't settle. A shadow. A feeling he couldn't quite explain. Baby Emma chose that moment to wake up, her little arms stretching out as she let out that soft whimper that melted hearts. Sarah picked her up, rocking her gently. "Look who's awake," she said, kissing her daughter's forehead. "She's growing so fast," Michael said, taking Emma in his arms. She stopped crying and gave that toothless smile that could brighten even the darkest day. In that moment, in that kitchen filled with the smell of coffee and love, it was impossible to imagine that in just 3 weeks, everything would be reduced to ashes and heartbreak. The next morning began with the usual hustle and bustle in the Harrison household. Sarah was making sandwiches for school lunch while Emma, drooling happily in her high chair, tried to grab at the sunbeams streaming through the kitchen window. Michael was fastening his tool belt around his waist, a ritual Jake watched religiously. "Dad, can I go to the firehouse with you on Saturday?" Jake asked for the 10th time that month, already knowing the answer. "When you turn 18, son. For now, focus on your studies." Jake rolled his eyes with classic teenage frustration. "Tommy Walsh has been 3 times? His dad lets him?" "Tommy Walsh isn't my son," Michael replied, tightening the last buckle. "I've got my own rules." Sarah glanced over her shoulder, smiling. "Your dad knows that if you ever set foot in that firehouse, you'll want to drop out of school and become a firefighter the very next day." "And what's wrong with that?" Jake mumbled through a bite of toast. "The problem is, a firefighter without an education is a firefighter with limits. You want to save lives? Study. You want to lead a team? Study." Jake nodded, but his eyes still sparkled with that youthful stubbornness Michael knew all too well. Chicago Fire Department Station 19 was 15 minutes from the Harrison home, but Michael always left 20 minutes early. "Punctuality is a form of respect," he liked to say to anyone who'd listen. That morning, as he arrived at the station, Michael found his partner, Tony Ricci, carefully polishing the fire truck. "Up early today, Mike," Tony said without looking up. 52 years old, always kept his gray mustache trimmed, and had been a firefighter for 28 years. Sarah made extra strong coffee. Emma was up 3 times last night. Michael started checking the gear. Another ritual. Every morning, each piece of equipment was inspected, tested, confirmed. "Trouble sleeping?" Tony asked. "She's teething. Seeing our little girl cry rattles me more than any fire ever could." Tony chuckled. "Wait till she starts dating. That's when you'll know real fear." "That's 17 years from now," Michael replied, checking the oxygen tanks. "That's what you think," Tony muttered. "My Carla was born yesterday and now she's engaged. Time flies, Mike." The first call of the day came in at 9:23. Fire at a commercial building on the north side. Overloaded electrical system, more smoke than actual flames. Still, Michael and his team treated it with their usual seriousness. "Sector 2 clear," Michael said over the radio, walking out of the second floor. His voice was calm and composed, but his eyes were scanning every corner for signs of danger. "Copy that, Michael. You're clear to return," the chief replied. Back at the station, the team gathered for lunch in the communal kitchen. It was a sacred tradition. No matter what was happening, lunchtime was about togetherness. Michael always brought extra sandwiches Sarah had made. "Mike, can I ask you something?" said Danny Morrison, the newest member of the team. 25 years old, 6 months into the job, and still had that spark in his eyes like the job was some grand adventure. "Sure, Danny. How do you not bring the job home with you? Some of the stuff we see." Michael chewed slowly. It was a question every firefighter asked sooner or later. "You do bring it home, Danny. Always. The difference is what you do with it once you get there. I've got a family that reminds me why I do this. When I see my son or my daughter, I remember I'm fighting so other families can have these moments too. And when it gets to be too much, then you talk. With your wife, your friends, a counselor if you need to. The firefighter who bottles everything up is the one who breaks." Tony nodded in agreement. "Mike's right. I've seen good men lose themselves because they thought they had to be heroes 24 hours a day. Real heroism is knowing when to ask for help. The afternoon brought two minor calls: a cat stuck in a tree that climbed down on its own, and a gas leak that turned out to be a false alarm. It was the quiet days that Michael liked most, not because they meant less work, but because they meant Chicago's families were safe. At 5:30, Michael put away his gear for the last time that day. Tomorrow was his day off, which meant a full day with the family. Maybe he'd take Jake to shoot hoops at the park, or take Sarah out to dinner while her mom watched Emma. "See you Monday," he waved to the team as he left. "Enjoy your weekend, Mike," Tony shouted, "and kiss that beautiful family for us." The drive home was always a transition for Michael. 15 minutes to shed the firefighter and become just a husband and father. 15 minutes to process the day and get ready for the hugs waiting for him. But today, something felt different. A tension in the air he couldn't explain, like the world was holding its breath. Michael shook his head, pushing the thought aside. It was probably just fatigue. As he turned onto Oak Street, he spotted Jake on the front porch, doing homework. The boy looked up and waved, that wide smile melting away every worry. Sarah appeared at the door, Emma in her arms, and Michael felt his heart swell. This was it. This was why he did everything he did, for these simple moments, for this perfect family, for this life he had so carefully built. He still didn't know that in 2 weeks and 3 days, everything would change forever. 2 weeks and 3 days later, Tuesday night began like any other at the Harrison home. Sarah had made lasagna, Michael's favorite, and the family was gathered around the kitchen table for dinner. Emma, now 6 months old, was in her high chair trying to eat mashed potatoes with her own hands, managing to smear more on her face than actually get any into her mouth. "Dad, did you see that the New York Fire Department is recruiting?" Jake mentioned casually, scrolling on his phone while eating. Michael froze mid-bite. "Jake, how many times do I have to say no phones at the table?" "Sorry." Jake put the phone away, though his eyes still gleamed with excitement. "But seriously, Dad, they have a special program for firefighters' kids. I could apply when I turn 18. Sarah and Michael exchanged a look. It was a conversation they knew would come eventually, but one they hoped to postpone a little longer. "New York is far, sweetheart," Sarah said gently, "and you've still got 2 years to go." 2 years fly by, Jake insisted. "Just imagine, the FDNY, it's the most famous fire department in the world. The guys who were there during September 11th, Jake," Michael's voice held a warning tone. "Being a hero isn't about fame or recognition. It's about serving your community, protecting the people you know, the people who live in your city. I know that, Dad, but..." The sharp sound of Michael's pager sliced through the conversation like a blade. Everyone at the table froze for a moment. It was a sound the Harrison family knew well, but it always came with a jolt of anxiety. Michael glanced at the screen, and his face went pale instantly. "Structure fire, multiple alarm, Oak Street, 1247. His voice was hoarse, barely audible. 1247 Oak Street, his own street, his own home. "Michael?" Sarah stood up from the table, immediately sensing something was wrong. "What is it?" But Michael was already running to the front window, his bare feet thudding against the wooden floor. Through the curtains, he could see an orange glow flickering against the neighboring houses. Smoke. A lot of smoke. "Jesus Christ," he murmured, then shouted, "Sarah! Jake! Get out of the house! Now!" The urgency in his voice sent everyone moving at once. Sarah grabbed Emma from her high chair while Jake jumped up, still not fully understanding what was happening. Michael ran to the bedroom, threw on his boots, and shouted instructions as he moved. "Sarah, grab the important documents. Jake, help your mom. Come on, go." "Dad, what's going on?" Jake asked, panic rising in his voice. "Fire on our street," Michael replied, lacing up his boots. "I have to go help." "Michael, no." Sarah appeared in the doorway, Emma crying in her arms. "You're off duty. Let the crew handle it." But Michael was already bolting out the front door. What he saw outside made his blood run cold. 3 houses down, the Peterson residence was completely engulfed in flames. The fire had already spread to the next house, the Williams, and embers were flying through the night air like wicked stars landing on the rooftops of nearby homes. And the wind. There was wind that night. Enough wind to carry the fire across all of Oak Street. Michael pulled out his phone and dialed dispatch as he sprinted toward the fire. "This is Michael Harrison, firefighter from Station 19. I'm on Oak Street, 1247. The fire has taken over 2 houses and is spreading fast. We need backup immediately. And I mean immediately. Michael, you shouldn't be there," the dispatcher replied. "You live on that street." "Exactly why I need to be here," Michael yelled into the phone. "These are my neighbors, my friends. Where's the first unit?" Station 19 was dispatched 3 minutes ago. Estimated arrival, 5 minutes. 5 minutes. In 5 minutes, the fire could reach his house, could reach his family. Michael hung up and ran toward the Petersons. Through the windows, he could see shapes moving inside. Someone was still trapped. "Hey! Hey! Is anyone in there?" he shouted, pounding the front door with his fists. A weak voice answered from somewhere inside. "Help! Please, help!" It was Mrs. Peterson, a 72-year-old woman who'd lived alone since her husband passed away the year before. Michael knew she had mobility issues, used a cane, and had trouble getting around quickly. Without a second thought, Michael kicked the door. The wood gave way after 3 tries, and a wave of heat and smoke hit him like a freight train. "Mrs. Peterson, where are you?" "Here, in the bedroom. I can't get out." Michael dropped low, knowing the air was more breathable, closer to the floor, and started moving through the burning house. His civilian clothes, just jeans and a t-shirt, offered 0 protection from the heat. He could feel his arms starting to burn, but he pushed forward. The hallway to the bedrooms was completely engulfed. There was no way through. "Mrs. Peterson, can you get to the window?" "No, my leg. I fell. I can't get up." Michael looked around frantically. There was a window on the far side of the living room that faced the backyard. If he could break through the wall between the rooms. He grabbed a heavy chair and started smashing it against the drywall that separated the living room from the bedroom where Mrs. Peterson was trapped. 1 hit, 2, 3, the wall started to crack. Outside he could hear the sirens getting closer. His team was almost there, but maybe not in time. "Keep talking to me, Mrs. Peterson. Don't stop talking." I'm really scared, Michael." I know, but you're getting out of here, I promise. You're getting out." With one last desperate blow, Michael broke a hole big enough to crawl through. Through the opening, he could see Mrs. Peterson on the bedroom floor, conscious, but clearly hurt. "I'm coming in to get you, Mrs. Peterson. Hang on." Michael squeezed through the hole in the wall just as he heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the sirens of Station 19 arriving outside. But when he looked out the bedroom window, his heart stopped. The embers carried by the wind had found a new target, a house all too familiar. A house with white shutters and red brick. His house was catching fire. And through the front window, he saw Sarah running back inside, Emma in her arms, probably to grab something she'd forgotten. Jake appeared at the front door, shouting something Michael couldn't hear over the roar of the flames. At that moment, Michael Harrison faced the most impossible choice of his life: save the elderly neighbor right in front of him or run to save his own family. And time was running out for both. For a moment that felt like an eternity, Michael was frozen. Mrs. Peterson groaned in pain on the floor beside him, clearly with a broken leg, while through the window he could see his own house being swallowed by the first flames. Sarah had disappeared inside with Emma, and Jake stood at the front door, shouting something lost in the roar of the fire. The decision came from instinct, not logic. Michael had been a firefighter for 15 years, and firefighters saved the person right in front of them first. "Mrs. Peterson, I'm going to carry you to the window," he shouted, crouching down to lift her. The elderly woman screamed in pain as he picked her up, but he couldn't afford to be gentle. With fast, precise movements, Michael smashed the bedroom window with his elbow, cleared the sharp glass from the frame with the sleeve of his shirt, and carefully passed Mrs. Peterson through to the backyard. "Stay right here. My crew will take care of you," he shouted to her. She was now safe, lying on the grass, away from the flames. But when Michael turned to exit the Peterson house, the path he'd used to get in was already gone. The fire had completely consumed the living room, and the heat was unbearable. His only way out was through the same window. He leapt into the yard and ran like he'd never run before. When he reached his own home, he found Jake in a panic on the sidewalk. "Dad, Mom went back in to get Emma's stuffed animal. I tried to stop her, but she said Emma was crying and— Where are they now? Michael cut him off, his hands already on the front door handles. Upstairs. I heard Mom shouting from Emma's room. Michael opened the door and was hit by a wall of thick black smoke. The fire had started on the roof, probably embers that landed on the tiles, and was now crawling down the walls. There was still time, but not much. Jake, stay outside. When my team gets here, tell them I'm in there. Dad, I'm going with you. No! Michael turned and grabbed his son's shoulders firmly. Jake, listen to me. You stay out here. Protect the perimeter. If something happens to me, you're the man of the house. Got it? Jake nodded, tears streaming down his face. Dad, please bring them back. I will, Michael promised, even though he didn't know if he could. He entered the house and immediately dropped low. The smoke was thickest near the ceiling, but Michael knew that wouldn't last. He had maybe 5 minutes before the entire house became unlivable. Sarah! Sarah! Where are you? A muffled cry came from upstairs. Michael! We're in Emma's room! The stairs are blocked! Michael glanced at the main staircase and saw Jake had been right. The fire had spread down the wall and overtaken the upper steps. But there was another way up, the service stairs in the back leading through the kitchen. He ran through the kitchen, past the table where, just 15 minutes earlier, they'd all been eating dinner like a normal, happy family. The lasagna was still there. Emma's high chair, with mashed potatoes scattered everywhere. The back staircase was still clear, but Michael could see flames licking the hallway upstairs. Time was almost gone. He climbed the steps 2 at a time, the intense heat making his clothes stick to his sweat-soaked skin. Upstairs, the smoke was thicker. He had to crawl along the hallway floor. Sarah! In here! In Emma's room! Michael reached the bedroom door and tried to open it. It wouldn't budge. Sarah, why is the door locked? It swelled shut from the heat. I can't open it. Michael kicked the door 3 times before it gave way. On the other side, he found Sarah crouched in the corner of the room, clutching Emma tightly to her chest, both of them coughing violently. Michael, thank God, Sarah sobbed when she saw him. Are you hurt? No, just the smoke. Emma's scared, but she's okay. Michael took Emma in his arms and helped Sarah up. The baby was crying, but Michael had never heard a more beautiful sound. She was alive, alert, breathing. We'll go out the same way I came in, he said, moving toward the door. But when they reached the hallway, Michael stopped cold. The back staircase was now completely engulfed. Their way out was gone. Michael, Sarah whispered, realizing what had happened. Now what? Michael looked around, panicked. The main stairs were still blocked. The second-floor windows were too high to jump from safely, especially while holding Emma. And then he heard it. Dad! Dad, are you okay? Jake's voice came from below, but not from outside the house. From inside. From the first floor. Jake! Michael shouted back. I told you to stay outside. The crew is here. They brought a ladder, but I have to help you. Jake, get out of the house now. But there was no response. Michael felt his world start to crumble. Now it wasn't just Sarah and Emma who were in danger. Jake was in there too, somewhere downstairs, breathing in toxic smoke, taking risks a 16-year-old kid should never take. Through Emma's bedroom window, Michael could see the flashing lights of the fire trucks. His team had arrived. Tony, Danny, all of them. But even with all their training, all their gear, Michael knew time was running out fast. The house was turning into an oven, and they were trapped on the second floor. Michael, Sarah said, her voice surprisingly calm. What are we going to do? Michael looked at his wife, at the baby girl in his arms, and thought of his son, somewhere below, risking his life to save them. And for the first time in 15 years on the job, Michael Harrison didn't have an answer. And the fire kept climbing. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the house, followed by Tony Ricci's familiar voice booming through a megaphone. Michael! Michael! Are you in there? Michael ran to Emma's bedroom window and opened it, a wave of fresh air rushing into the suffocating room. Down below, he could see all of Station 19 in action. 3 trucks, the ladder being raised, hoses uncoiling. Tony! We're on the second floor, Emma's room. Hold on, Mike. We're coming up with the ladder. When Michael turned back into the room, what he saw made his heart drop. Sarah was lying on the floor next to Emma's crib, unconscious, likely overcome by the thick smoke. Emma was crying desperately in her crib, her little arms reaching out. "Sarah! Sarah!" Michael dropped to his knees beside his wife, checking her breathing. She was alive, but completely unresponsive. At that moment, the ladder appeared at the window, and Tony Ricci emerged at the top in full gear. "Mike, we're getting you out of here!" "Tony, Sarah's unconscious. Emma's in the crib. Pass the baby first. We'll come back for Sarah." Michael picked up Emma, wrapped her in a blanket, and handed her to Tony with trembling hands. "Take care of her. She's my daughter. I'm taking her down and coming right back for Sarah. Hold on!" Michael watched Tony descend with Emma, a desperate wave of relief washing over him. At least the baby was safe. Now he had to keep Sarah safe until Tony returned. But as he waited, a realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Where was Jake? "Jake!" Michael shouted. "Jake! Where are you?" Silence. Only the growing roar of the flames. Michael looked at Sarah, still unconscious on the floor, then at the hallway leading into the rest of the house. The fire was spreading fast, but he couldn't leave Jake lost inside. "Sarah, I'll be right back," he whispered, kissing her forehead. Michael left the room and ran down the burning hallway, calling out for his son. The heat was unbearable, the smoke tearing into his lungs, but he pushed forward. "Jake! Jake! Answer me!" He checked the master bedroom. Empty. Jake's room. Empty. The bathroom. Empty. He made it partway down the main staircase, still barely passable, and shouted toward the first floor. "Jake! Son! Where are you?" Nothing. Just the awful sound of the fire devouring his home. Michael scrambled back up to the second floor, coughing violently. When he reached Emma's room, he saw Tony at the window again. "Mike, where were you? Where's Sarah?" Michael looked to where he had left Sarah, and his heart stopped. She was gone. She was right here. Unconscious. She was right here. "Mike, the room's empty." Michael spun around in panic. Sarah had vanished. How could an unconscious person just disappear? "She must have woken up," Michael shouted back to Tony. "She must have gone to another room. Mike, the house is collapsing. You need to get out now." "I can't. Sarah's lost in here. Jake's lost in here." Michael ran down the hallway again, checking every room, every corner where Sarah could have taken shelter. The hall bathroom, empty. The closet, empty. The guest room, empty. "Sarah, Sarah, where are you?" "Jake, son, answer me." The smoke was getting thicker, the heat more intense. Michael knew he had only minutes left before the house became a death trap. "Mike!" Tony screamed from the window. "The beams are giving out! If you don't get out now, you're going to die!" Michael made one last, desperate attempt, checking under beds, inside closets, anywhere Sarah or Jake could have been hiding or trapped. Nothing. They were just gone. Crack! The terrifying sound of the main beams beginning to buckle echoed through the house. "Michael, now!" Tony roared. With his heart in pieces, Michael ran to the window and jumped onto the ladder. The moment he left the room, part of the ceiling collapsed exactly where he'd been seconds before. Tony rushed the ladder down at full speed, and when they reached the ground, Michael immediately looked around for the familiar faces of his team. "Emma's safe," Tony said quickly. "Lisa Chen's with her in the ambulance. What about Sarah? Jake? Did you find them?" Michael scanned the scene and saw something that froze him. His fellow firefighters were looking down, avoiding eye contact. Danny Morrison was sitting at the back of a truck, head in his hands. The chief was speaking quietly into the radio, his face grim. "Tony," Michael grabbed his partner's arm. "Where are Sarah and Jake?" Tony lowered his eyes. "Mike, we couldn't find them." "What do you mean, you couldn't find them?" "The second sweep didn't find anyone else in the house. Only Emma. Only Emma was rescued." Michael's knees buckled. No, they're in there. Sarah was unconscious in the room. Jake was somewhere in the house. Mike, we did 3 full sweeps before the structure became too unstable." "You didn't look hard enough," Michael shouted, trying to run back toward the house. Danny and 2 other firefighters grabbed him by the arms. "Mike, stop! The house could collapse any second. Let me go! My wife and son are in there!" Michael fought with a desperate strength, but they held him firmly back from the smoking wreckage. "Sarah! Jake! he screamed until his voice cracked. "I'm here! Dad's right here!" The chief approached, his face heavy with sorrow. "Michael, I'm sorry. We did everything we could." "No." Michael shook his head violently. "You didn't do everything. They're alive. They have to be alive." But as he looked at the smoking remains of his home, at the somber faces of his team, at Emma, now an orphan, cradled in the paramedics' arms, Michael Harrison faced the most terrifying possibility of his life. Maybe only one of them had made it out, and maybe he had failed as a husband and as a father. Michael kept struggling against the arms holding him back, his strength fueled by pure desperation. "You don't understand! They're in there! I know they are!" "Mike, please," Danny said, his own voice cracking with emotion. "The structure's compromised. If we keep trying..." "Keep trying?" Michael turned to Danny with wild eyes. "You stopped trying! You gave up on my family!" The chief stepped closer, placing a heavy hand on Michael's shoulder. "Son, we did 3 full sweeps. There's no one alive in there." As if summoned by the chief's words, a deafening crash echoed through the night. The side wall of the Harrison house gave out completely, collapsing in a cascade of burning wood and bricks. Michael stopped fighting and stared, hypnotized by the horror. His home, the one where he'd built a lifetime, was dying right before his eyes, and inside, everything he loved most in the world had been reduced to ash. "No," he whispered, dropping to his knees on the wet grass. "My family. My whole family." The firefighters let go of him, realizing the fight had drained out of him. Michael knelt there, staring at the smoking wreckage with the hollow expression of someone whose soul had been ripped away. Tony knelt beside his friend but didn't know what to say. There were no words for this kind of loss. Michael slowly stood and walked toward the ambulance like a ghost. Lisa Chen was prepping Emma for transport, checking her vitals one last time. "How is she?" Michael asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Stable. She's going to be okay," Lisa replied gently. "I have to take her to the hospital now." Michael looked at Emma in the paramedic's arms. His daughter, now an orphan. No mother, no brother, only him. And what kind of father was he after failing so completely? "Sir, you should come with us," Lisa said kindly. "You need medical care too." "No," Michael shook his head. "I'm staying here." "Mike," Tony stepped forward. "You need to be with Emma. She's just a baby." Michael looked at Tony with dead eyes. "What difference does it make? I've already failed her. I failed all of them." Lisa hesitated, then climbed into the ambulance with Emma. "We're taking her to Chicago General. When you're ready." Michael gave a vague nod, watching the red lights disappear into the night. His daughter was alone now, headed to the hospital with strangers, because her father had failed to protect her. "Michael," the chief approached, his voice heavy. "You did everything you could. You saved a life tonight." "One life," Michael repeated bitterly. "I lost 2 to save 1. What kind of firefighter does that make me? What kind of father?" "The best one I know," Tony said firmly. "Mike, listen." "No," Michael exploded, rising to his feet. "Don't tell me I did my best. My best would have been saving my whole family. My best would have been faster, smarter, more prepared." Michael walked toward the wreckage again, but this time no one stopped him. They knew he wouldn't try to go back in. He just needed to be close. He knelt down on the grass, only a few feet from the smoldering ruins, and began to cry. Not quiet tears, but deep, guttural sobs that tore from the core of his broken soul. "Sarah," he whispered between sobs. "I'm sorry, my love. I'm sorry I couldn't save you. Jake," his voice cracked completely. "My boy, I'm sorry I failed you. I'm sorry I wasn't the hero you thought I was." The firefighters around him stood in respectful silence. Some cried too. They had known Michael for years. They knew the kind of man he was, the kind of father he had always been. Watching their hero fall apart like this was almost too much to bear. "Mike," Danny approached after a few minutes, "let me take you to the hospital. Emma's going to need you when she wakes up." "How am I supposed to look her in the eye?" Michael lifted his tear-streaked face. "How do I tell her that Daddy couldn't save Mommy and her brother? How do I live with that?" Danny didn't have an answer. No one did. Michael sat there in the grass, staring at the wreckage of his life. 15 years as a firefighter, Hundreds of lives saved, and when it mattered most, when it was his own family, he had failed. The hero of Lincoln Park was no more. He had died alongside Sarah and Jake in that burning house. All that remained was a broken man sitting on the wet grass, weeping for the family he couldn't protect. The firefighters kept working on the wreckage, putting out the last remaining flames, but Michael didn't move. He stayed where he was, motionless, lost in his infinite grief. Tony sat beside him in silence, offering the only thing he could, his presence, because sometimes when everything is lost, the only thing left is a friend who stays with you while you fall apart. And Michael Harrison was utterly shattered, unaware that his greatest surprise and redemption was about to rise from the darkness. Michael remained seated on the wet grass, staring at the smoldering remains of his life. The tears had stopped flowing, not because the pain had eased, but because there was nothing left inside him to give. It was as if he had been completely emptied out. Tony stayed beside him in silence, occasionally placing a hand on his friend's shoulder. The rest of the team kept working through the wreckage, extinguishing the last flickers of flame. But everyone knew there was nothing left to save. "Mike," the chief approached. "Rodriguez is on his way to take you to the hospital. You need to be with Emma." Michael didn't even lift his head. What kind of hospital takes in a man like me to care for a child? What kind of father am I if I couldn't protect my family? "Michael Harrison," the chief said firmly, "you are the best firefighter I've ever known, and the best father that little girl could ever have. Emma needs you. She deserves better," Michael whispered. That's when Danny Morrison, who had been working near the back of the wreckage, shouted something no one expected. "Hey! Hey! Guys! Someone's coming from the back!" Everyone turned in the direction Danny pointed. At the far end of the yard, near the collapsed garage, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was hard to make out through the smoke and the dim lighting, but it looked like someone carrying another person. "Who is that?" Tony stood up, helping Michael to his feet. The figure came closer, and through the haze still hanging in the air, the details slowly came into focus. It was a young man, tall, thin, carrying a woman in his arms. Both were covered in soot and grime, but they were walking. "Oh my God," Tony whispered. Michael felt his knees buckle. It couldn't be. He didn't dare believe it. The figure stepped into the beam of one of the floodlights the firefighters had set up. And when it finally broke through the shadows, Michael let out a cry that echoed through all of Oak Street. Jake. It was his son. Jake Harrison, 16 years old, dirty, bruised, exhausted, but alive. And in his arms, unconscious but clearly breathing, was Sarah. "Dad!" Jake called back, his voice hoarse and weak. "Help! Mom's hurt!" Michael ran like he had never run in his life. He couldn't feel his legs, couldn't feel the ground. He just ran toward the impossible, toward the miracle walking straight at him. "Jake! Jake! My boy!" Michael reached him, and for a moment didn't know who to grab first, Jake or Sarah. He chose Sarah, carefully lifting her from Jake's trembling arms into his own. "She's breathing," Jake said, collapsing to his knees on the grass. "Dad, she's breathing, but she's been unconscious for a long time." "Paramedics!" Michael screamed. "I need paramedics now!" The medical team rushed over with a stretcher. Michael gently laid Sarah down on it, his hands shaking as he caressed her face. "Sarah, my love, you're safe now. You're safe." As the paramedics began treating her, Michael knelt beside Jake and pulled him into a desperate hug. "My son, my boy, I thought I lost you. I thought—" Michael couldn't finish the sentence. He just held Jake tightly against his chest. "Dad, I knew you'd find us somehow," Jake said, his voice choked. "I knew you'd never give up on us." "How, Jake? How did you get out?" "I searched the entire house. When the fire got too intense, I found Mom unconscious in the hallway bathroom," Jake explained quickly. "She must have gone there after waking up, looking for a way out. I carried her to the back window in the guest room." "The back window?" Michael repeated, still in shock. "We jumped onto the garage roof, but it was on fire too. I had to carry Mom through the yard to a safe spot behind the neighbor's fence. I stayed with her the whole time, Dad. I protected her until I knew it was safe to come back." Michael looked at his son, his 16-year-old son, with a mix of pride and disbelief that left him speechless. "You saved your mother," he finally said. "I learned from the best," Jake said with a tired smile, tears in his eyes. You always said we'd take care of each other. We're a team, remember? Tony approached, also wiping tears from his eyes. Mike, Sarah's stable. Serious smoke inhalation, some minor burns, but stable. Jake needs to be checked too. Michael nodded, still holding Jake. Jake, are you hurt? Are you in pain? Just tired, Dad, and my hands are a little burned from carrying Mom, but I'm okay. Michael took his son's hands in his and saw the injuries. First-degree burns, small cuts. Jake had sacrificed his hands to save Sarah. My hero, Michael whispered, kissing his son's forehead. My real hero. Mr. Harrison, one of the paramedics approached. Your wife is being prepped for transport. She's going to be fine, but she needs hospital care, and your son should be looked at too. Michael stood, helping Jake to his feet. For the first time in hours, he felt like he could breathe again. His family was alive, hurt, shaken, but alive. Jake, he said, placing an arm around his son's shoulders as they walked toward the ambulances. How did you find the courage to do what you did? Jake looked up at him, his eyes now carrying a maturity that hadn't been there just hours before. You taught me, Dad. When someone you love is in danger, you don't think twice. You just act. Michael smiled, the first genuine smile of the longest night of his life. We're a team, he said. We're a team, Jake echoed. And as the ambulances prepared to take his family to the safety of the hospital, Michael Harrison knew he had just witnessed something more powerful than any rescue he had ever made. The birth of a true hero, his own son. At Chicago General Hospital, the Harrison family occupied a private room in the emergency wing. Sarah was conscious, breathing with the help of supplemental oxygen, but her eyes were once again full of life. Jake was in a bed beside her, having his hands bandaged by a nurse. Emma slept peacefully in the portable crib, finally reunited with her complete family. Michael moved between the three of them like a man in a trance, still trying to process the fact that the nightmare was over. Every few minutes, he touched Sarah, then Jake, then Emma, as if he needed to physically confirm that they were really there. Mike, Sarah said softly, her voice still hoarse from the smoke. Are you okay? You look shaken. Michael laughed, a sound that carried relief, exhaustion, and disbelief all at once. Shaken? Sarah, I thought you were all dead. I spent the last few hours believing I had lost you and Jake. I'm sorry for worrying you so much. Sarah reached out her hand to him. The last thing I remember is waking up in Emma's room and coughing hard. After that, all I remember is waking up with Jake carrying me. Michael turned to his son, who had been quietly listening to the conversation. Jake, I need to understand what happened. Tell me everything from the beginning. Jake sighed, organizing his thoughts. After you left to look for Mom, I kept trying to open that window in your room. I finally broke it after a few minutes, but then I heard Mom coughing really hard from the hallway. I went to the bathroom, Sarah interjected, recalling fragments. I felt like I was going to pass out again and thought maybe cold water would help. When I found you, Mom, you were on the bathroom floor, Jake continued. Unconscious, but breathing. The fire had already taken most of the main hallway, but the guest room was still accessible. Michael listened, captivated, recognizing the intelligence and courage his son had shown. I managed to carry you there. The back window in that room is pretty low, remember, Dad? It was our only chance. The window that leads to the garage roof. Michael nodded. Exactly. I broke the glass and helped you out first, Mom. Then I jumped, but the garage roof was already catching fire too, so I had to carry you quickly to safety away from the house. Sarah squeezed Jake's hand, her eyes filling with tears. My brave boy. Where did you go? Michael asked. Behind the Hendersons' fence. There's that spot with the trees, remember? Far enough to be safe, but I could still see the house to know when it'd be safe to come back for you. Jake, Michael shook his head, deeply moved. You stayed there the whole time? Watching over your mom alone? She woke up a few times, but she was really confused from the smoke. I kept her lying down, talked to her, told her everything was going to be okay. Just like you do when we're sick. Michael felt his chest tighten with pride and emotion. And when did you decide to come back? When I saw the fire was under control, and the firefighters weren't running around so much anymore. That's when I knew it was safe to bring her back. Why didn't you yell for us sooner? We were searching everywhere for you. Jake looked down, a bit embarrassed. Honestly, Dad, I was scared. It was dark, really loud, and I didn't know if you'd hear me. I was afraid that if I yelled too soon, I'd attract attention before it was safe. Michael stepped closer and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Jake, you made the right call. You protected your mom and made smart decisions under pressure. That's exactly what a good firefighter would do. Really? Jake looked up, seeking approval. Really? In fact, Michael paused, glancing at Sarah, then back to Jake. You did something I couldn't. You stayed calm, assessed the situation, and executed a perfect rescue plan. Dad, you saved Emma, and you saved Mrs. Peterson too. But I nearly lost both of you in the process. You, at 16, managed to do what I struggled to do, even with 15 years of experience. Dr. Rodriguez, the physician in charge of the family, entered the room with a warm smile. Harrison family, I've got good news. Sarah, your tests came back clear. The smoke inhalation was significant, but there's no lasting damage. You'll be ready for discharge tomorrow morning. And Jake? Michael asked. Minor burns on his hands, nothing that won't heal completely in a few weeks. The kid was lucky, considering what he went through. It wasn't luck, Michael said, looking at his son with admiration. It was intelligence and courage. Emma's doing great too, the doctor continued. You can take her home whenever you're ready. As for you, Mr. Harrison, your wounds are clean and dressed. Nothing serious. After the doctor left, the family sat in silence for a moment, taking in everything that had happened. Jake, Sarah finally said, you saved my life. If it weren't for you, Mom, we're a team. That's what Dad always taught us. Michael smiled, remembering the conversation they'd had weeks ago in the kitchen when Jake asked about fear and courage. Do you remember what we talked about, Jake? About being afraid? That every firefighter feels fear, but the difference is not letting it paralyze you. And what did you do when you found your mom unconscious? Jake thought for a moment. I was scared, really scared, but I thought about what you would do, and I acted. That's true courage, son. It's not the absence of fear, it's acting in spite of it. Sarah, Michael, and Jake exchanged glances, a family that had walked through both literal and metaphorical fire, and come out stronger. Dad, Jake said, his voice more serious, I still want to be a firefighter. After today, I'm sure of it. Michael nodded slowly. When you turn 18, we'll talk. But after what I saw today, I think the Chicago Fire Department would be lucky to have you. Really? You really think so? Jake Harrison, Michael said, locking eyes with his son with absolute pride. Today you showed me you're already a hero. The rest is just training. In that hospital room, surrounded by the family he thought he'd lost, Michael Harrison finally understood that he had created something far greater than a single act of heroism. He had created a legacy of courage that would carry on to the next generation. And that was worth more than any rescue he had ever made. 6 months later, Oak Street had changed. Where the Harrison house once stood, a new structure now rose, not identical to the old one, but something that represented a fresh start and hope. Michael had insisted on rebuilding on the same street, in the same spot where he had nearly lost everything, because he believed that facing fear was the only way to overcome it. Dad, more letters came, Jake said, walking into the new kitchen with a stack of mail. At 17, Jake had grown, not just in height, but carried a maturity that impressed everyone who met him. Letters for what? Sarah asked, preparing lunch while Emma, now a year old, played in her new high chair. People from school want to interview Jake for the student paper, Michael explained, smiling. And a TV producer wants to make a documentary about teen heroes. Dad, I already said I don't want all that attention, Jake sighed, placing the letters on the table. And I respect that, Michael replied. Real heroism doesn't need spotlights. The Harrison family's story had spread quickly through the local media after the tragedy. 16-year-old saves mother from fire, while firefighter dad rescues others, made headlines across several papers. But Jake always avoided interviews, preferring to keep his life as normal as possible. Jake, are you sure about applying to the fire academy next year? Sarah asked, a mother's concern clear in her voice. I'm sure, Mom. More sure than I've ever been about anything. Michael watched his son with pride. Over the past 6 months, Jake had poured himself into his studies, especially math and science, preparing for the academy. He'd also started going with Michael to the firehouse on weekends, not as a visitor, but as a serious apprentice. "Tony called earlier," Michael said. "The chief approved your volunteer internship for the summer. You'll be working at Station 19 during your break." Jake's eyes lit up. "Seriously? Seriously? Basic duties only, equipment maintenance, theoretical training, physical conditioning. No real emergencies until you're officially trained." "Dad, that's amazing," Sarah smiled, even with the concern in her eyes. She had learned to accept that heroism ran in the Harrison bloodline. Better to support and guide it than try to stop it. "And how's Mrs. Peterson doing?" Sarah asked, changing the subject. "Recovering well," Michael replied. "Her leg healed perfectly. She always asks about Jake when I visit." Mrs. Peterson had become part of the Harrisons' extended family after the fire. Michael visited her regularly, and Jake insisted on going too, forming a special bond with the elderly woman. "Speaking of which," Jake said, looking at his father, "can I go see her after school today? I promised to help her with the garden." "Of course. Just don't be late for training at 5. Jake had started a strict workout routine, preparing for the academy's physical entrance exam. Michael trained with him every afternoon, sharing not just exercises but stories and lessons from years of service. The phone rang, interrupting the family conversation. Michael answered, and his expression turned serious. "Understood. We'll be there in 15 minutes. "What is it?" Sarah asked, recognizing the tone. "Big call. Residential fire on the north side. They're calling in all available units." Michael stood up and began his usual prep routine. But this time, Jake stood up too. "Dad, can I go? Just to observe?" Michael hesitated. Since the fire, he'd become more protective of his family, especially about Jake joining him in potentially dangerous situations. "Jake, this is a real emergency. Not training. Please, Dad. I promise I'll stay out of danger. I just want to see what it's really like." Sarah looked at Michael, then at Jake. "Maybe it's time," she said gently. "He needs to see what he's choosing." Michael nodded slowly. "All right, but you stay with me the whole time. And if I say stay back, you stay back. No arguments. Promise." 20 minutes later, father and son arrived at the scene. A 4-story building, flames visible on the top 2 floors. Several families had already been evacuated and were being treated by paramedics. "Jake, stay here with Danny," Michael said, pointing to a safe zone. "Watch, learn, but don't move from this spot." Michael joined his team and disappeared into the building. Jake stood nearby, fascinated by the firefighters' coordination, the way they moved like a well-oiled machine, each knowing exactly what to do. After 40 minutes, all residents had been rescued, and the fire was under control. Michael emerged from the building, dirty and exhausted, but wearing that look Jake knew well, the expression of someone who had made a difference. "So?" Michael asked as he walked over to his son. "What did you think?" "Dad," Jake said, his eyes glowing with resolve. "It was incredible. Watching you all save those families, working together. That's what I want to do for the rest of my life." Michael smiled and wrapped an arm around his son's shoulders. "Welcome to the family, son. The Chicago Fire family." On the way home, Jake looked out the window of his father's pickup, gazing at the city he had grown to love and protect. "Dad, do you think people really understand what you guys do? The sacrifices you make?" "Not everyone, Jake. But we don't do it for recognition. We do it because it's right. And because someone has to do it," Jake added. "Exactly." That night, after the family had dinner and Emma was put to sleep, Michael found Jake sitting on the front porch, staring at the street where everything had changed 6 months ago. "What are you thinking about?" Michael asked, sitting beside him. "Just thinking about how much has changed. The house, us, my life. For the better." Jake smiled. "Definitely for the better. You know, Dad, that night of the fire, when I was carrying Mom through the backyard, I remembered something you always said." "What's that?" "That real heroism isn't about being the strongest or bravest. It's about doing what needs to be done, even when you're scared." Michael nodded. "And you found that inside yourself." "I had the best teacher." They sat in silence for a few minutes, father and son, looking out at the quiet street where ordinary people slept peacefully, unaware that men like them were ready to protect them at any moment. "Jake," Michael finally said, "you know you've chosen a hard profession, right? It's not just physical. It's emotional, too. Seeing people at their worst, not always being able to save everyone." "I know, Dad. But I also know that with every life we save, every family we reunite, we make a real difference in the world." Michael looked at his son with infinite pride. Jake was no longer just his boy. He was a young man with purpose, with integrity, with the fire of genuine heroism burning in his heart. "Well," Michael stood up, "training starts tomorrow. If you're serious about this, we're going to make sure you're ready." "I'm ready, Dad." And Michael knew he was. In a world full of uncertainty and fear, there are special people who choose to run toward danger when everyone else runs away. They don't wear capes or have superpowers. They wear uniforms, carry heavy gear, and stand between chaos and safety. They are firefighters, police officers, paramedics, soldiers, ordinary men and women who make extraordinary choices every day. They leave their families each morning not knowing if they'll return. They face fire, save lives, and protect entire communities. Not for fame or fortune, but because someone has to do the job. Because every life matters. Because they believe it's worth risking everything to protect what's most precious, human life. So the next time you see a firefighter, a police officer, or a paramedic, remember, you're looking at a real hero. Someone who chose to serve, protect, and, if necessary, sacrifice for people they may never know by name. These are the true guardians of our society. These are the heroes who walk among us. And they deserve our respect, our gratitude, and our support. Because when the world catches fire, literally or metaphorically, they're the ones who run in to save us. If this story touched your heart and made you reflect on what real heroism looks like, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this one. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you know a real-life hero? Tell us your story below. Thank you so much for watching until the end. Your support means the world to us. And don't forget to check out our next video. We have more incredible stories waiting for you.